Hey guys, how's it going and welcome to the channel. My name is Michael Frymus. I'm a Toronto-based photographer, filmmaker, and a content creator all about teaching and inspiring other artists such as yourselves, becoming better at the craft in photography and filmmaking. So if this channel feels like it's right for you, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and leave a like because, well, it helps a lot. In my last video, I did a review of the Sony a6500, the camera I am using right now, and the camera I use pretty much all the time for photography and filmmaking. So this is going to be the second part of the three-part series where I talk about the actual settings that I use and the settings that I recommend using for photography and for filmmaking. So let's dive right into the menu and let's get to it. So we're going to go directly into the menu and click the first button, which is the quality. The one that I shoot all the time is the RAW because it's the easiest to use in Lightroom and it actually produces no quality loss. So it's the one that I highly recommend using and probably the one that you should be using all the time. Nothing else we're going to touch here. Everything here else is good. Moving on, we do have the drive mode. So right now I am using the continuous shooting mode. I do have it set on low. But they're also mid, high, and high plus. So that's just going to give you the different burst modes. So when you do hold down on the trigger button, you are going to be able to shoot more consecutively and a lot faster depending on which setting you have. So we also have a single shooting autofocus mode. We also have a few different options. We have a 2-second, a 5-second, and a 10-second timer. And we also do have different bracketing modes. So moving on to the fifth submenu, we have the focusing mode. The one that I use all the time is the continuous AF, which is good for photo mode and for videos. We also have the single shot AF, which is going to allow us to focus on one shot, and every time we press down the button, it's going to focus again. The focus area that I use most often is either the wide or the zone, which you are able to more precisely pick out where you want your focus points to be. But we also do have a center, and we also have a flexible spot, so depending on which one you want to use, if you need to focus on a specific area in your image. The autofocus illuminator, I usually keep that off because that's usually the red light that illuminates when you're trying to focus in darker situations. So I just keep it off at all times. The center lock on AF, that allows us to track an object in our frame. So if anything's moving, all you have to do is tap on the actual screen and it's just going to focus and follow the subject in your frame. Nothing in this menu that we're going to be changing, keeping it as it is. We're not going to touch any micro adjustments. For ISO, actually this should be set on, I usually have it on the lowest ISO possible. And the highest it does go up to is 51,200 ISO. There is also an auto mode, and with the auto mode you are able to set the maximum and the minimum ISO. So mine is set at 3200, but you can go a lot higher or a lot lower depending on your liking. But like I said, I prefer to do everything manually. So I just have it set at the lowest possible and then adjust as needed. The metering mode, I always set to multi, but there are a few other ones if you want to experiment. I personally don't even bother with them. Nothing else in this menu we need to look at. Everything else is just keep it as it is. Flash, we don't use flash, so skip that. For white balance, I do everything manually again. So I actually use the color temperature adjustment. So I always stick with 5600 Kelvin, which is the daylight temperature. This is going to be my standard. So as soon as I turn the camera on, this is the default setting, but I can also easily change this. I can also go down and also go up as needed. But we also do have our own preset modes that come standard with the camera. And there is also an auto white balance. For the creative style, don't even bother with this if you are shooting in RAW because it's not going to affect anything. Same as the picture profile mode. No point in using it now, only in video mode because it's not going to affect any of the pictures because you are shooting in RAW. Going on, we do have the manual focus assist, which I keep on all the time, whether I'm using manual focus or not. The reason is with the peaking color, which I have set here to red, but you can also use yellow or white, but red is the most visible, and setting the peaking level on low, medium, or high, this will allow us to see the outline of the image when we're in manual focus mode. So we will see what is in focus and what isn't. We have smile and face detection. I keep the smile and face detection on because if I am ever in the shot like I am vlogging, it's going to be tracking on my face and it's going to keep my face in focus. And now I'm going to be going into the settings that I use for filmmaking, and I have those presets in dial 1 and dial 2, but if this is your first time doing it, go into the video dial and start from the beginning. So going back into the menu, first thing we do want to do is change our movie/S and Q motion. We want to choose the manual exposure mode, not the S and Q exposure mode, but the manual exposure mode. So for my file format, I use 4K and I record in 24p 100 megabytes because this is going to give you the highest quality possible. We can also do dual video record, but I don't. We have the autofocus drive speed. We have a slow, normal, and a fast setting, so this depends how fast you want your focus to shift from object to object. I keep it at normal, sometimes slow, depending on the project that I'm working on. Autofocus track sensitivity, I usually keep this on responsive, just so it's ready to focus and focuses as fast as it can. Audio recording is on. I have my audio level set to 7, but you can also go a lot higher or a lot lower, depending on how strong you need your audio levels, depending on the microphone that you're using. For our marker display, I usually have this off when shooting in 4K, but when I am shooting B-roll and I do want to have it more cinematic, then I'm going to use any of the aspect ratios just so I can see how to frame my image. But because this is going to be just my standard vlogging setup, so it's not going to be cinematic, so there's going to be no need for adding any crop bars. We have the release without lens, which I do have enabled, and that allows us to have our record on, but be able to take the lens off the camera while still recording. So we can come up with a lot of cool effects like that, like lens whacking. So that's basically letting light into the sensor while the lens is actually off the camera. It's a cool effect. Maybe I'll explain it one day. We also have release without card. Keep this disabled because we don't want to accidentally start recording when we don't actually have a memory card in the camera. Pretty much useless. Steady shot on. Keep that on pretty much all the time, except for when we have our camera locked on a tripod. I usually turn this off. A really cool feature that this camera has is the clear image zoom. If you enable this feature, then you are able to crop in on your image by actually using a smaller section of the sensor. So it's actually going to give you a much cleaner and a nicer image than if you were to crop in post. So if you do want to have a variety of focal lengths other than the standard prime lenses or zooms that you have, you can enable this, click on the zoom feature, and you just dial in the amount of zoom that you want. So you basically get more out of your lens. We also do have zebras. So I have mine set at 100 and plus, but we also do have different customizable versions, which we can go higher or lower, but mine's usually at 100. This allows us to see everything that is overexposed on our image, so it helps us prevent overexposing our image. There is also the grid lines, which I do have enabled, so this helps a little bit with helping you frame. So these are all the cross marks, the horizontal and the vertical lines. It just helps a little bit with framing. There is also an exposure set guide, and I keep this off. The camera comes standard once you have it on, and it's kind of redundant to have it because on the bottom it tells you what your shutter speed is, but it actually says it again twice. So I just keep this off. Pretty much pointless to have it on. So that's pretty much the settings that I use for filmmaking when I'm shooting 4K 24 frames per second. There are a whole bunch of customizable keys that you can change, but I am going to be talking about them a little bit later in this video. So once you have finished customizing the entire menu system, one more thing that you can do is actually change your shutter speed, your aperture, your ISO, and your picture profile mode. So when you do save this in your preset, then it's actually going to save all these settings so you don't have to be constantly changing it every single time. So the way I have it set is I'm shooting at 1/50th of a second, f1.8, the lowest I can go, ISO 200, and picture profile 8. So if I ever need to close down my aperture or increase my ISO, I can easily do that because it's always going to be set at the lowest number possible. So all I have to do is just increase it. So once we have finished everything, gone through the entire menu, and set all of our dials properly, the shutter, the aperture, and the ISO, What we have to do now is actually go into the first heading, scroll 4 tabs to the right, and here we're going to find the memory recall button, and we're going to click on either the 1 or the 2, which is going to be the same 1 or 2 dials at the very top of the camera. So if we click 1, all the settings are going to be saved onto dial 1. So that's pretty much it. We have now finished customizing our number 1 preset mode. So simply every time we scroll the dial and we go on number 1, all our settings are going to be saved. Everything is going to start from the beginning every single time. So moving on to the second custom preset, we're going to do the exact same thing. We're going to stay in our film mode, or we can actually stay in preset 1, but when we actually save it, we're going to save it as the preset number 2. We're going to go directly into the menu, and the only differences that I have here is the file format. I am using XAVC SHD, which is basically 1080p. For the record settings, I am using 120p at 100 megabytes, which is once again going to give us the highest quality possible. Everything else should be the exact same, except for our marker display, which in this case I do have on, and I do have the aspect ratio set to 2.35 because I am shooting slow motion. Everything is going to be more cinematic, so I am going to be cropping down the image in post, adding that letterbox from the top to bottom, but everything else will remain exactly the same as I did when I was shooting in 4K. The only thing that is going to be changed is my actual shutter speed. I do need to have my shutter to be double the frame rate. So in this case, it's going to be at 1/250, which is the closest we have, and everything else will be exactly the same. Our aperture is going to be at 1.8, ISO 200, picture profile PP8, and we have our temperature at 5600 Kelvin. So those are my custom settings for photography and filmmaking that I use all the time. But actually within the custom preset 1 and 2, we actually do have another 4 possible customizable presets, but in this case, they're not going to be saved to the camera like preset 1 and preset 2, but they are going to be saved directly into the memory card. The other really cool thing that this camera has is its ability to customize all of its buttons. Not only does it come with a C1, a C2, and a C3 button, but practically every button on this camera is customizable. So in order to set up your custom buttons, we're going to go into the menu, we're going to go into second subheading and scroll right to the 8th tab. And here we're going to see custom key shoot. We're going to click on that. So here we see the C1 button, which I have set to white balance, the C2 button, which I have at focus area, and custom button 3, which is my audio record level. But we can also change any of the other settings, the left, right, up, down, and the center buttons to anything we want. As we can see, there are quite a lot of options. There's a lot to choose from, so whatever you feel most comfortable with and whichever settings you use most often, that's what you should be using. Another really good way of accessing the menu without actually going into the menu itself and going and changing your settings is by enabling the function menu settings. So every time you click on the function button, you're going to find a list of 12 different features in which you can change and reorganize to the way that you want. So this is done by going to the menu again on the same section that we were before, and we're going to scroll down to the function menu settings, and here we can see all 6 upper settings and all 6 lower settings. So we can change every single one. Same thing like customizing the C1 button, C2, and the C3. We have every single option on this camera, so we can change it to whatever our preference is. So we can quickly access it by clicking the function menu and accessing the feature that we want to use. Lastly, we do have the AEL and the AF/MF dial. This is a neat feature because all we need to do is flick the switch and we're going to be able to choose 2 different custom settings on this. So what I have for AF/MF is when I click on this, I enable and disable the autofocus. So every time I click it, it changes to my manual focusing mode. And if I click it again, it's going to go back into the autofocus mode. And the AEL button I use right now as my zoom. So if I ever want to zoom in onto my image in the video If I want to crop onto it, I can simply click the AEL button and dial the settings that I want to determine how much I want to zoom in onto the image itself. I actually don't use this very often, but in some cases it can be very handy. So those are all my settings that I use for photography and filmmaking on my custom 1, custom 2, and custom 3 buttons, and how I set up my camera for the easiest workflow possible. So that's it for today's video. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to leave a like and leave a comment below if you have any questions or comments on how to set up your camera. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace!